So this evening I'd like to take up a verse from Dongshan's 5 ranks, but in particular a phrase from it which is so evocative of every moment of practice, but also, and perhaps more pointedly, of every moment of living this life with the mind of practice, with awareness of practice, with the intention of practice, with the heart of practice. So the phrase is the lotus in the midst of fire. Possibly you've heard that. It's had become a kind of a travelling phrase. It moves around. It occurs, first of all, in the Vimalakirti Sutra, a couple of thousand years ago. But it popped up strongly in Dongshan. And when we say Dongshan, that is the person who is venerated in our sutras under the Japanese version of his name, Tozan Ryoko. That's Dongshan. Dongshan Liangji becomes, and please don't ask me how, Tozan Ryoko. These things happen on the way to the Kasbah. So, the phrase in its place in the 4th rank of Dongshan's, the first cycle and 4th rank of Dongshan's very, very interesting 5 ranks. This mysterious cycle of, in a sense, a kind of map of the way we walk in this practice, and then how we meet that in our lives, or how our lives come to meet that. But this is the verse. 2 crossed swords, neither permitting retreat, dexterously wielded, like the lotus in the midst of fire. Thus you resolve from your heart to soar in the heavens. So this is pointing to and coming from the fact that all realization and realized behavior is formed in the crucible of difficulty. As often said, difficulty makes the way genuine. And this verse is pointing towards practice and how it evolves in us an open heart mind, a radiant open heart mind. The very image of the lotus is that radiant realization, radiant mind. And at the same time, it is talking about the many things in these 2 cross swords. The very simplest or most direct level, these 2 cross swords are sometimes referred to as the absolute, which we could call vast emptiness, and the contingent, which we call this, and everything that is by moment, flowing as our lives, utterly contingent and mortal. So there is in all of us the kind of pointed challenge to resolve these as not 2, the absolute and the contingent, to constantly resolve them. In practice, in Zazen, every moment is a kind of settling of the heart upon that possibility of form and emptiness and form, not 2. In fact, even less than one. So that's the practice side of it in formal terms. And then there's also the, I guess you could call it the crazed world side of it, the utterly contingent world where we find ourselves. What are the two crossed swords in that context? And what is this matter of not permitting retreat? After all, moment by moment in Zazen, you don't permit yourself retreat. If you do permit yourself retreat from difficulty or pain or perhaps a sense that, everything is flat today, not as good as yesterday or not as good as 6 weeks ago, you have already, in a sense, stepped away from practice. Practice doesn't permit retreat. It says no turning back. Right where you are is where practice begins. Dogen says it very plainly. When you know the place where you are, practice begins. So this is, the place where you are is just as you are. This is the mysterious part of it. Just as you are is the perfect condition for practice. And so, two crossed swords, neither permitting retreat, dexterously wielded. Dexterously wielded is implying not some kind of extraordinary sword dance, although sometimes practice can feel a bit like that. Much more than that, it's pointing to the fact that, very simply, skill grows. In this business, we grow more skillful, more skilled in practice, more skilled with luck, in goodness, as the Metta Sutta begins, with those very words. Those who are skilled in goodness. The very idea that goodness is a skill is a very interesting proposition. It's not something that either you have or don't have, or that lands on you or doesn't land on you. So to dexterously wield form and emptiness, absolute and contingent. This is said to be like the lotus in the midst of fire. And then it goes on, or Dongshan goes on to say, thus, exactly like this, you resolve from your heart to soar in the heavens. And this soaring in the heavens, do you remember last time we were up on the mountain, we explored, and back here as well, we explored those phrases from Dogen, where he speaks of riding the clouds, soaring with the wind, riding the clouds of difficulty. That's the image of soaring in the wind, there is no impediment. So it's not some kind of, might sound a bit glorious, soaring to the heavens, but in fact it's speaking the way about the way that a bird flies unimpeded in the vast open sky. That kind of freedom, that kind of complete fit with your element. Groundless, empty, and yet completely at home. That's where it's pointing. So don't think it's about getting some kind of chariot and ascending to some heaven. D.H. Lawrence had a great thing about that. He said, you can get to heaven in a single leap, but you'll leave a devil in your place. I think it's worth looking into that. There are no saints in Zen. It's another sort of footnote. So, Dongshan's 5 ranks, this matter to be resolved, the absolute and the contingent, emptiness and form, these two crossed blades, neither permitting retreat. We can't get out of reality. There's no retreat, which is its great promise, actually. So, you remember the Yogi Berra accidental koan. He drops. He was that good baseball player, famous baseball player, who tended to say absurd things that were valuable in retrospect from a koan point of view, such as when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So already, two neither permitting retreat, two crossed swords, take it. Make it hold, resolve it as what? As this. We do resolve it as this. It's this muddled human mortal being that resolves this matter. So, the other side that I want to really sort of focus on more tonight is the side of, the way that difficulty makes the way genuine. The way that we can have this image of how we hold ourselves within difficulty, the lotus in the midst of fire. It's an interesting image because a lotus, is sturdy, but delicate, very delicate, persistent, beautiful and open, but think of it in a scorching fire. It's kind of a paradoxical image that this lotus blooms in the midst of fire. So it's worth looking into what is this fire. Not just what is the lotus, what is realized mind, but fire. So, one of the things that springs immediately to mind is the words of the Buddha, we are living in a house on fire. And he wasn't speaking about bushfires or burning houses, not even at that moment speaking about global warming or the destruction of the earth. He was speaking about this very body and the fire of impermanence, the fire of all things pass quickly away. So that's certainly that is certainly an element of this fire, the lotus in the midst of fire. This kind of infinite reach of mind inside the fire of ordinary mortality. Then there's another aspect. We could say the fire has an element of the kind of chaos that human beings tend to have to deal with. The chaos of the human world, the sense of almost deliberate cruelty and destruction that we see around us. It's sometimes hard to not feel that our civilization is looking to end itself, wanting to end itself, which is a very formidable thought, a huge thought. But it is so profoundly following the limit points, exceeding its own limit points and plundering its own life world. It's hard not to see it that way. So that fire that in a sense we kind of live with in a daily way every day. We read the latest news about that fire. And there is that. Another aspect of this fire, which is a more consoling one perhaps, is, in a fire you can't tell one part of the flame from another. And there's endless interweaving of flame. It's almost like a liquid flow. And so to some extent the fire is also this sense in which all of us, inside this great impermanence, or this one thing becoming another, We are so profoundly connected. We're all in this together. Everything moves together. That too is a kind of fire that both envelops us, consoles us at a certain level, but it also leaves us with no permitted retreat. We are all in this together. One body. At the deepest level, one great body. Another way of understanding the fire and the two crossed swords is the dilemmas of life. You know, the situations which simply cannot be avoided, not permitting retreat, non-negotiable. Decisions that might have to be taken, for example. That's one aspect of how the kind of fiery circumstances that practice has to bloom inside. It's not a kind of, it doesn't take place in a carefully constructed safe place. It takes place right in the midst of fire in every aspect that we can look at in this word fire. Another conventional way of referring to the fire is the passions. And this is not speaking about deep passion for life. It's speaking about wild and bitter and destructive emotional fires of different kinds. And we encounter that profoundly, of course, face on in the second of our great vows. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. I'll come back to that point in a minute, the question of the passions. But at every point, practice is the art of not moving off. It's the vow and commitment of not moving off from circumstances, of not, in a sense, confecting alternative circumstances and sort of living mentally in those while fire rages around us. So one of the very direct meetings with this matter comes from Dongshan himself, from the record of Dongshan, and it is the well-known, I forget which case it is, around about 40-something in the Blue Cliff record. It is Dongshan's cold and heat. So a monk asked Dongshan, when cold and heat visit us, how should we avoid them? Dongshan said, why not go where there is neither cold nor heat? The monk asked, where is there neither cold nor heat? Dongshan said, when it is cold, kill yourself with cold. When it is hot, kill yourself with heat. Now, it is worth noting that Dongshan's monastery was known to be very cold in winter and very hot in summer. So there possibly was just a very simple practical matter being raised here. But Dongshan took it as a valuable sort of way to jump into the thick of the matter. Obviously, this monk is wanting to move off. This is a moving off request. When cold and heat visit us, how should we avoid them? Where's the escape route? Right here. Well, Dongshan said, why not go where there is neither cold nor heat? And that also gathers up into itself, why not go? Why not take yourself into the place of practice which does not seek to identify cold or heat, which does not entertain cold versus heat, Obviously, cold and heat are like absolute and contingent, or light and dark, or, they are, it's a fork in the road. So to some extent, Dongshan is saying, take the fork in the road, take the whole matter. So why not go where there is neither cold nor heat? There is, you could say, in the depth of your zazen, there is neither cold nor heat. There is neither pain nor comfort. There is neither male nor female when you look deeply. There is neither this moment nor the next moment. There is no next. It becomes like a phrase that Jojo once used. He said, 1,000 miles, deep snow, just the same great plain of weather, no weather. It's like the place where the opposites dissolve, where they don't even attract interest. So definitely Dongshan is pointing him deep into his own practice. But the monk doesn't seem to grasp that entirely, because he says, where is there neither cold nor heat? It may be that he wants to know more about how to touch this place of utter rest, unmoving, complete. Well, Dongshan said, when it is cold, kill yourself with cold. When it is hot, kill yourself with heat. This is not some kind of dismissal of the monk at all. He's actually directly speaking of let heat kill ideas of heat. Let cold end ideas of cold. That at certain level, just in terms of hot and cold temperature and hot and cold conditions, there is a sense in which practice itself can take you to a place where it can be steaming hot, meltdown heat, and yet there's no need to move off from that. The need to move, the need to sort of seek a comfort alternative has simply dropped away. It's not as interesting. It's not interesting enough. It has lost its interest. I can remember also a session in Gorek's Run. For some reason in the old days we used to do session in my sort of early student days, either in the middle of summer or the middle of winter. So we had extreme cold and extreme heat. It's a very cold valley in winter. It gets down to about -4, -5. And the Doksan line was out on the veranda, and there was one morning when it was -6 on the Doksan line, and you still sat there, unmoving in the Doksan line. And people would stir their soup in the morning to see if any of the chopper's fingers had snapped off into their soup. It's really cold. The funny thing was, sitting there with no heating, by the way, at all, but sitting there in the hall and feeling the cold really come close and begin to really touch, but feeling how you could come, something in you could come to exactly meet the cold in a place which was neutral. It didn't have hot or cold in it. It had a certain flavour of, you are welcome here, even this cold. And the cold then could welcome you. You could come to this place of agreement and accepting of the offer of the cold. So even with physical heat and cold, there is that mysterious practice offer right there. That is not to say you need to seek out extremes to practice in. And it's not to say you shouldn't rug up if you're cold, to maintain a fairly steady temperature. But instead of making an enemy of the cold and shrinking from it and becoming more cold and more rigid and sort of allowing fear to come in and make things far worse, you could meet it like two crossed swords, neither permitting retreat. You don't retreat, the cold doesn't retreat, and you just meet it in its truly empty nature. It has no intent to harm. It is blameless, and your own blamelessness can rise to meet that. So, it's an invitation. But Dongshan is also pointing in the direction of the passions, hot and cold passions, and hot and cold states and states of mind. And this is a whole rich subject, which, in fact, the second great vow truly draws us into in the online meditation series we've been doing lately. Yes, last time was a whole sort of deep look into the second vow and the ways in which greed, hatred, and ignorance are, of course, constantly arising. In the world, that's very vivid, but in us, it's very vivid as well. And that's where we can actually abandon them within ourselves and find this point of meeting, the exact meeting point, where an open response can arise. I won't try and go all the way through the points, that this could raise, but I do want to look not so much at the cold passions. That would be things like envy and possibly fear. Fear is underlying almost every kind of bitter state of the heart or mind. But the one that comes up very frequently in people and in discussion is anger. And anger is so interesting because it is a natural energy of an organism, of all organic life. There is a place where we need to be able to say, no, this must stop, or this is not acceptable, or this must change. And finding anger that can come clean is very, very demanding. Most anger comes riddled in low IQ. It's almost like the IQ level drops in anger with astonishing speed. And it comes with fear. It comes riddled with fear, and it comes riddled with a kind of instant story, defensive story. The self is confronted and an immediate kind of case is built to preempt further insult or injury. And that's all a very painful sort of mixture to even sort out. It takes a lot of settling with and sitting with and allowing and sorting to get to the bottom and to find the fear, the root fear, and to let that go, to abandon, to be able to reach the point of softening in the face of that fear, of accepting the offer of that fear, of not rejecting, not pushing it away any further, pushing it down, disguising it any further. So that's a whole sort of story, a whole process. In a very simple sense, what it is pointing to is that response, the open response that, Tori Zenji Bodhisattva's vow explores the open response in the face of a very, receiving abusive language and enmity from somebody. And remember, and if you know that sutra well, it says a startling thing. It says that very abuse conveys the Buddha's boundless loving kindness. It is here to emancipate us from everything built up by our own wrongful actions. It's an opportunity to turn things around profoundly with the open response. And he goes on later to say, with an open response to such abuse, we completely relinquish ourselves. And that is the very heart of the open response. It is coming forth with and as no self. The part of us that can be at rest in circumstances is this exquisite matter of no self. And a practical way to turn things around is to use the wisdom of Hakawin. Remember the story of Hakawin and the baby? I've mentioned it several times, and I might have mentioned it in the last few days. I can no longer remember. But very simply, Hakawin, confronted as a young monk, living alone in a little hut near a fishing village, practicing deeply. Suddenly there was a very angry knocking on the door, and a woman with her young daughter and a newborn baby, and she shoves it at Hakawin and says, "You thieving, phony monk, we know all about this. Here, you take the baby." The girl just studies the ground the whole time. And Hakawin said, is it so? That's not true, but is it so? And a newborn baby or a perilous situation or something needing our urgent attention, it does belong to us, does it not? In some measure, it is pointing to us. We are responsible for everything we see. We see clearly. So he takes the baby. He has a very hard time. He has to feed the baby and try to follow his routine and learn how to look after a baby and become inevitably deeply bonded by the needs of the baby. And he then has to face the moment when there's another knocking on the door. This time the woman says, "She told us everything. It was the boy in the fish yard. Give us back the baby." And he's holding the baby. He has to give it back. And he says, is it so? And that "is it so" is not a sigh of relief. It's just as mixed as the one before. And it is just as accepting of what the character for patience presents us with, which is the image of a sword above the heart. So "is it so" is the open response. It is the response of not knowing, no self, the response of wonder. A very good question. Is this my baby? Very good question. I'm giving back the baby. What is this? So is it so? And it is a marvelous kind of upaya to keep with you, this mind and impulse of not "it is so." When you feel, are confronted, "it is so," with a fierce rejection of anger in it, a pushing away. Linji says, when, whatever confronts you, don't believe it. First skillful move, don't believe the confronted case. Clear that aside. What is visible, what is plain and revealed next, when there's no view in front of it? This is the open gesture of "is it so?" This is something like living by prajna paramita, as the Heart Sutra says. It's living by the wisdom of emptiness, living by the nudge of emptiness, of not knowing, of no self. And there's a woman in America who called Robin Hart, a black woman who is also a deep Buddhist practitioner. And she wrote once in great detail about the deep confrontedness of being black and a woman in America. The profound kind of injustice that she had that was embedded in almost all responses of the world to her. And so this is, in a way, a very hot state that she explored in this particular moment. And as we talk about a sword above the heart, she is contending as a young African-American woman, just with the whole enormity of the racism that she endures, this kind of ongoing madness of, well, the whole historic sort of maimed state of the American nation from its history, not just of slavery, but of segregation. And it's almost like white America now depends upon the existence of this kind of impossible other that is black. So she has to live with this as sanely as possible. She actually is highly educated herself, child of educated parents. I think she had a law degree, and later on she studied theology, a divinity degree as well. In her law practice, and by the way, she was admitted to the bar as an attorney in California, and apparently that's the hardest of all bars to be admitted to in that country. So a very highly accomplished and highly intelligent woman. But she said that, this is what she said about her time working in her job as a lawyer. A very prestigious job she had. I was the only African American out of approximately 200 attorneys in my law firm, despite the fact that I made an extra effort. She dressed professionally in quality suits and silk blouses and gold jewellery. I was constantly mistaken for a secretary and treated rudely and with little respect. When I walked into a partner's office, I was often asked with a scowl, "What do you want? What do you want?" When I identified myself and the reason for entering the office, an apology soon followed. But just think of the anger she had to constantly swallow, the affront she had to constantly accept in some form, wondering, why am I accepting this? How do I accept this? She asked this question. She says, where can black people go to get away from the madness that engulfs us? Where can we go where it is neither hot nor cold? Where is that place? Every day, every single day, I am treated as if I have no intelligence, no feelings, as though my checks are automatically suspect, as though I am a thief, as though I am a non-entity, as though my opinions have no worth, as though I am not competent. I could go further, but I will stop, she says. She also says that the history, or black history in America, gives her some kind of deep sustenance. It's a terrible history. It's a history of slavery, but it's also a history of emancipation. It's a history of continuing oppression, but it's also a history of strong and not always violent resistance. And she finds strength in that. She finds something with which she can come to meet the racism in that. Some form, some touch perhaps, with a wider self, a no self, a bit of no self in that. But she goes on from her Buddhist perspective to say, I know within the depths of my consciousness that I am limitless in my ability to create all that I need and desire. I know that I could not survive, and my people could not have survived, the horrors inflicted upon us, but for some invincible power within each of us. that enables us to persevere. Her turning point when she stopped seeing or feeling that her power had to be endowed upon her from outside. And when she began to see instead she could find that ability to soar to the heavens, perhaps, inside herself. So she began studying her mind very closely in meditation she put it, to take back my mind from the racism of others. And she talks about the fact that, she says it very plainly, as long as I feel anger, I cannot experience anatta, no self. It's important for me to realize that I do not have anger. Anger has me if it is affecting my life in such a way that I cannot think clearly and my aspirations are so limited. So partly she uses mindfulness, and mindfulness for her is very much sort of taking up her own mind almost scientifically, looking at it like as a specimen. Not exactly what I would necessarily recommend in quite those terms, but she can see how her breath is responding to her feelings. She takes an interest, a kind of minute, subtle interest in how breath is different when it is non-judging, and just also exactly what sort of conditions and what sort of circumstances cause anger in her. She doesn't pretend this is easy. She says it's very hard discipline. It's like lifting weights. You have to start with small, manageable weights and build more strength. She admits, I don't yet have the ability to observe my anger when the racism is acutely painful. But even this is all right. The seeds are being planted. And she particularly talks about this kind of is it so process. She doesn't call it that, but this is how she describes it. She calls it tracking back a feeling, holding it in a state of wonder rather than knowing. So, why did that upset you? Something she remembers to ask herself when she feels really confronted. Why did that upset you? And then she answers herself, because she thinks I took the book. Did you take the book? No. Then why are you upset? Do you think she thinks you took it because you are black? Probably. Are you sure that's the reason? No. Even if it is that your problem or is it hers? How does her thought affect your life at this very moment? So this is a highly exploratory kind of state. It's taking it to a resting point of sufficient calmness and clarity so that she can, in a way, see through the angry response to the place that is neither hot nor cold. So it's quite an interesting example, partly because the insult is so profound. Racism operates on such subtle, unconscious and arrogantly conscious levels all at once. It's an amazing matter to contemplate having to live with that. It's so kind of sharp, I think, in the world at the moment. I don't know about you, but I can feel very ashamed of being white. So the Lotus in the Midst of Fire is very much about more enlightened behaviour in the thick of life, in the thick of the fire. And the difficulties that we face, it's very mutual. The wising up and the difficulties enhance each other. Difficulties and being confronted by the fact of our own greed, hatred and ignorance, or toxic mind states or bitter mind states, They are, in fact, what orient us on the path. They let us find our feet on the path. They are an offer to accept and to work with. And this is not permitting retreat. This is the lotus blooming and maintaining itself in the midst of fire. So, it's very interesting when I sit, I notice I often sit down after taking in some of the sharp shards of news about the world as it is. And it sometimes feels as though when I sit, there's a whole process of finding my way back to that very delicate place that arises in Zazen, which somehow seems to hold, how can I put it, not as simple as the medicine, but exactly what there is here to meet that overwhelming sharpness and all the feelings that I know people in the room feel. They've talked to me about them. The world gone crazy, the sense of crazed people in power, the sense of brutal strength in power, and so on. And yet there is this strange way in which that very abuse that we're kind of accepting into our minds and bodies has the power to wake up, to rouse this delicate, ancient kind of melody. Rumi calls it the bright, the bright reed song, the quiet, bright reed song. This delicate kind of note that we attune to in our practice that somehow has, like a lotus is delicate, yet it has this extraordinary power to blossom and bloom almost because of the fire. It's almost as though the insult and confrontedness of the world as it is creates, brings to meet it, like coming to meet the cold. It brings, it in a way wakes up. It wakes up. It wakes us up. It is Buddha mind that wakes up in its face, in its presence. Difficulty makes the way, and it makes the way genuine. And in the preface to Minding the Earth, I talk about that moment where I was, as a 12-year-old, I was sat up all night talking with my brother and sister about the horrors visiting the world at that time, till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and then went to bed for a little while to sleep, and woke up still feeling that extraordinary weight of the world in myself. And along with it, a kind of interest. I'm taking on the weight of the world. That was a thing of wonder, but it was buried under the heaviness. And then I sat down at the kitchen table and I simply pulled up the same chair I'd sat on the night before and sat down at the kitchen table, and I touched this old oak table, and I have no idea why any of those things added up to what they added up to, but along with my bowl of cereal, so clearly what came through me was exactly like the words of Julian of Norwich: all things are well. They're deeply fucked, and they are well. This is the place where practice touches, where there's apparent opposition, where it dissolves and resolves within us. It resolves partly in what action we can bring to bear. It resolves into the nature of the heart that we can offer the world. And it is alive in each of us. There is some sense in which exactly what is needed is provided by the fire itself. when faced, when recognized, when taken on, taken up, admitted, not retreated from, neither permitting retreat. So the sword above the heart seems to bring the heart to life. And finally, there is the fact that, I touched on it before, that, part of the fire is just how mixed and how shared and how preposterously mixed and wild this great one body that we share really is. And there's a kind of playful but serious poem as well, which points to how we can meet the fire with our mixed selves, our vast connectedness. It's called My Ancestry DNA Results Came In. Just as I suspected, my great-great-grandfather was a monarch butterfly. Much of who I am is still wriggling under a stone. I am part larva, but part hummingbird too. There is dinosaur tar in my bone marrow. My golden hair sprang out of a meadow in Palestine. Genghis Khan is my fourth cousin, but I didn't get his dimples. My loins are loaded with banyan seeds from Sri Lanka, but I am descended from Ravana. Ravana? Not Ram. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Ravan. Yeah.
Ravana, not Ram. My uncle is a mastodon. There are traces of white people in my saliva. 3.7 billion years ago, I swirled in the golden dust, dreaming of a planet overgrown with lingams and yonis. More recently, say 60,000 BC, I walked on hairy paws across a land bridge, joining Sweden to Botswana. I am the bastard of the sun and moon. I can no longer hide my heritage of raindrops and cougar scat. I am made of your grandmother's tears. You conquered rival tribesmen of your own colour, chained them together, marched them naked to the coast, and sold them to colonials from Savannah. I was that brother you sold. I was the slave trader. I was the chain. Admit it, you have wings, vast and golden, like mine, like mine. You have sweat, black and salty, like mine, like mine. You have secrets, silently singing in your blood, like mine, like mine. Don't pretend that Earth is not one family. Don't pretend we never hung from the same branch. Don't pretend we don't ripen on each other's breath. Don't pretend we didn't come here to forgive. We did come here to forgive. And this lotus in the midst of fire is the place where all the opposites meet, and forgiveness was already not necessary. So